Hi, I am Molly Valentine Dierks, and I'm a contemporary artist and a professor at CU Boulder. And the majority of my work is looking at the intersection of nature, technology, and poetry. This is my most recent video piece, and this is called The Tender Hand of the Unseen, or In Perfect Silence at the Stars. And it's actually, do you guys know what it is, what you're looking at? Birds, yeah. So these are actually, this is footage of starling murmurations from around the world. And this past summer in Denver, it was projected onto a clock tower. So I was really thinking about the idea of time and also thinking about how we measure our lives in terms of looking at screens or in perfect little minutes that are all mapped out. And so the installation that was in Denver was really meant to basically give people the excuse of looking at birds as a way of measuring time. So the screen is a tiny bit washed out, but I work across different genres. So I'll work in sculpture with my hands. I also work in various mediums, like this right here is laser cut vinyl. This is an installation in Texas. And I've just sort of begun to branch out into new media and video and augmented reality. So the postcard that you all have, it's a bit complicated, but if you turn to the back and you know, later or now, whenever you'd like, and you scan one of these two QR codes and you turn it back over, it will actually play a small video of what we just looked at on the front of the postcard. So it's like a miniature video to take with you. Um, so this right here, I'm just going to go through three different series of work: the reproduction series, the tree series, and my most recent work, which is public art and installation. So the reproduction series is a body of work that's using the visual vernacular and the materiality of highly reproduced objects, things that we buy and consume, to talk about the very human experience of trying to relate to one another or to be intimate with one another, to connect. And so this is this is a piece that I did right before I moved to Boulder. and it's called Starfish. And these are actually the torsos or the legs of sex dolls that were sewn together and stuffed. And each of these images is from an exhibition that was called Silicone Lover. So I was really thinking about, when I walk through Home Depot or Lowe's, for example, I see all of these things that are talking about the human body, but in these very industrialized ways. So um, you know, any of us that are sculptors or people that have houses have gone to Home Depot, have gone to Lowe's before. And I find it really interesting that they have, fittings that are called like nipples, or male and female, and that kind of really interesting binary that, as a country, we seem to be wed to. So what I wanted to do was kind of disrupt that vocabulary, and instead of having it be, male to female, I would do like nipple to legs, for example, or nipple to nipple, or male to male. So this was kind of like a little handheld series that was in a glass vitrine in this exhibition. And prior to moving to Texas, I was actually at the University of Michigan, where I participated in a Master's of Fine Arts program that was crossover between art and design, which I really appreciated, because while I would say that I'm primarily an artist, I'm also interested in the vocabulary of design. So what are the industries in our culture that we use for commercialization, things that are maybe not, individually hand produced, and how can I kind of disrupt that vocabulary and create a new experience, but with kind of like a familiar set of objects. So this is a piece that I got a grant for that has traveled with me to many states, but this is actually a neon shopping cart. So the base is a shopping cart, and the remainder of it is traced in neon. And I dragged it all around the environs of the school and took images of it just to give it kind of like a striking contrast with the natural environment. And I did a neon apprenticeship when I was living in Richmond. So I initially was actually a high school mathematics teacher prior to going back to school to study art. And after I quit teaching high school, I did a neon apprenticeship because I was really interested in this material that kind of bridges the gap between the handmade and the highly commercialized, or the highly produced, something that's meant to advertise and seduce you into doing, whatever it might be. And in the course of doing the neon apprenticeship, I realized what a kind of a beautiful craft tradition it is, but also what a long history it has. So I worked in a neon shop for 9 months. And at the end of it, I think the only letter that I was able to do was the letter A. So for this particular project, I used the grant funding that I got courtesy of my school to actually hire a really wonderful neon outfit in Detroit, Michigan, that was kind of like slowly going under because of the commercial landscape in Detroit, and they did a beautiful job. This is another piece that I completed when I was in graduate school and have shown since, and this is called Hard Bodies. So this is actually metal and wood. And for the wood, I worked with an automotive studio that covered the wood portion, which is the thicker part of the pill, in automotive paint for free. So they volunteered to do it, which is a lot of fun. And while I was taking classes in the MFA program, I was also involved in the architecture program because I was really interested in design. So they had a wonderful machine called a water jet cutter. And each of these kind of pill forms sits on a mirror that is, the silhouette of the mirror is outlines of Disney princesses and different cartoons. So thinking about the way that you can have an object that looks like something or maybe touches on the beauty industry, but has kind of a seductive violence to it and is also useless. So the next body of work is a bit of a departure, but is also sort of dealing with the same themes. And this is an ongoing body of work. It is quite complicated and takes a lot of time. It's very intricate. But for this body of work, while I was in graduate school and working towards my thesis, I was walking around a lot in nature and collecting, essentially just collecting discarded items and trash. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. I had this like set body of work that I was supposed to do for my thesis, and this was kind of taking place, like behind the curtains. And over time, this body of work really developed into something that I began showing more and more, and I began working on more and more. And really, what I'm doing with this is I'm taking tree branches and other items that I found, and I'm remixing them or manipulating them so that they become these kind of surreal, futuristic environments. So I think for me, it was a way of folding in my love of walking, my love of collecting, my love of kind of like the detritus of human industry into these alien and foreign landscapes that make you, they don't really have like a set, they're not coming down in a set standpoint, I would say, about, what we're doing to the earth, but they're talking more about the entanglement of humanity and of the natural world. And this body of work actually started when a close family member of mine became unexpectedly ill, and so I was thinking about this struggle that I have with the way that humanity is imprinted on the earth, but at the same time, the way that I feel a kind of gratitude for things like the medical industry or, what the plastics industry is able to do. So there's this, for me, it isn't a black and white entanglement that we have. There's levels and layers of, I think, a desire for control over the natural world, a desire for control over um, our bodies and the way that we're perceived by others. And so some of the details show kind of the level of intricacy. This particular sculpture is maybe 8 to 10 inches high. I did things like grow crystals, I used sugar, I used pieces of styrofoam on the branch tips, and essentially created these little worlds that draw you in, but I think at the same time are a little bit repulsive as well. And maybe because they have kind of a clinical feeling to them, but they're using elements that are of the organic world where we typically don't think of having like a clinical distance. So a lot of the bases are actually things that when I was doing this series at graduate school, and then I went to Finland and I did a wonderful residency in the Finnish countryside, and that was where I revived this work because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do prior to getting there. But while I was there, I was able to collect a bunch of really beautiful tree species, and I had brought a bunch of trash with me, and so this kind of collection came back into being. And then as I was driving, I was a teacher, a professor in Texas, and I had to commute an hour and 15 minutes each day to work. So there was a lot of driving involved. And what I used to do is pull over on the side of the road and kind of collect these beautiful containers that people had discarded, like the lid of a water bottle, for example. and other kind of various strange bits of plastic that were sort of evidence of something, that was used, that had an intimate relationship with somebody's body at some point. And then I combined these with different branches that I put together. And so each one of the trees, is how I think of them, is actually typically like 3 to 5 or 6 branches that have been spliced together. So even the trees are highly manipulated in order to get like the perfect curve. Something that suggests a desire to connect, a leaning towards, but an inability to do so. And a lot of the items that are in this series are also things that are not just found. Some of them are purchased, but they're things that reference the human body. So, for example, like the little buds that you put in your ears to listen to music, or syringes. I think there's a lot of reference to the beauty industry as well as the health kind of complex that we have, that I'm sure for some medical reasons, but also for reasons that I don't completely understand, is like a little bit afraid of touch. So there's all these sort of, like tubes and needles, and things that we see at the doctor's office that are ways that we mediate our body or our physical relationship with somebody, but also get well or are evidence of being sick. There are also items in here. These are actually silicone thimbles, and then on the left is a baby bottle nipple. So things that talk about, the tradition of craft or motherhood, that kind of closeness and body to body contact. And each of these is actually the titles of these are things that I'm interested in terms of the psychological landscape of our country. Some of them are things that I've borrowed from Netflix shows or from poetry that I've read, and there's a line in the poem that really speaks to me. So this is actually a piece that's called Twilight Sleep. And twilight sleep is a state that women in the 1950s who were given the drug scopolamine would go into when they were birthing their children. So they would go into the hospital, be given this drug, and they would have no memory of, having given birth, and they would have to have these kind of like lambskin restraints. So I thought that was such an interesting territory of suppression, and control, especially when it comes to women and their bodies, but also kind of like a weird 1950s sci-fi um, feeling. The tips of these are coated in wax, and these are actually hairbrush bristles that I've implanted in the base. So it's a lot of like extremely meticulous work. This is one of my favorite of this particular series. I'm working on what I consider to be like the third series of the tree sculptures. And this piece, when you press a button that's off screen or out of the frame of the photo, there are actually tiny miniature bubbles that come up through the base, and this is called Dream Machine. So I basically reconfigured a toy that I had found that was a camera that when you press the button, it blows bubbles. And so when you press the button outside of the base of this tree, these little teeny, like, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter bubbles would blow up. And these are one summer I was walking around and there were a number of these things that I believe blow up balloons. So you attach them to a hose and then you put balloons on them and they blow up these water balloons, and I embedded them in the base. And this is part of a series that I actually continued as an artist in residence with CICA Museum, which was a wonderful experience, called Skin Hunger. So I started it during the pandemic, and I was really thinking about the quality of loneliness, of being alone. And there's something called skin hunger, which is a psychological term, especially for people who have lost a spouse. They experience a kind of hunger, a physical desire for touch that can't really be fulfilled. So, as a single person during the pandemic, I really was thinking about, what are all of the moments in our society where we wish for a connection, but we can't quite bridge that gap, and what does that feel like, and what is that doing to us physically? So here are some more detail shots, and here is a brief video of the bases, the process of putting together the bases. So this was actually while I was an artist in residence at CICA. I had some rare time to take a video of the process itself, which I typically avoid. And the last body of work, or kind of, I guess, space that my creative practice occupies, that I wanted to talk about was public and installation, which recently I've been leaning more towards, just because I feel like as an artist that's getting older, I'm really thinking about the way that art and the work that I do can connect to an audience beyond the work that I do, teaching students in the classroom, which is also very important to me. So recently, and I've been tasked with more students than I've had in the past in my current role. So I've really kind of turned to the digital realm for design, because it's easier to manage if I have a number of students. So this is a series from last year that was part of a design festival in Toronto called Design 2, which is a lot of fun. And these are actually LED um, drawings, signs, light sculptures. So I started out in neon, and now part of the decline of glass neon is LED lights that are taking over, like the sign and the commercial landscape. And so I wanted to use that language to create something that wasn't advertising anything, that was more just an invitation to sit with a form, and in particular, a form that looks familiar but isn't something that you can name or identify. This series is entitled "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress," and I'm currently finishing up 9 more of these for this year's Design 2 Festival in Canada. And that's actually the title of a science fiction book where a number of people called loonies are sent to live on the moon. And it's sort of a study of what happens when outcasts inhabit another space, and then their behavior starts to mimic the qualities of the society that they're trying to escape. So, really thinking about, particularly with our current political landscape, what does it mean to be an outcast? Like, what does it mean to occupy a space that's so emotionally uncomfortable that you have to be ejected from society? And what are the ways that, instead of denigrating something that you can't name, you can celebrate it as something sensual or joyful? So these are relatively large scale. The blue piece is about 5 feet tall. And I think one of my favorite aspects of this work was just the way that, because it was part of a larger design festival, there were more people that were able to interact with it, that it wasn't part of like a gallery system, for example. So it felt like it was a little bit more um, open to the public. This is a piece that I completed in 2024. So it is actually made of, it's another piece that I designed during the pandemic when I was thinking about what does essential labor mean? And so this is a piece that was up for a year in the Museum District of Fort Worth outside of the old Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. It's a beautiful building designed by Herbert Bayer, who's a noted architect, mid-century modern style. But everything is like very square and very concrete. So I thought about, what are the ways that I can kind of disrupt that narrative and create something that's a little bit more sinuous or that evolves as you are walking around it. And so the piece that I came up with, um, which is called Day Labor or To Love One Another, is based on a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. And he's writing to a friend. He's talking about the importance of the labor that's inherent in loving one another and connecting to one another, and the fact that it's an act of intention and it's something that you have to work to do. So the color palette is also inspired by the LGBTQIA plus movement in Texas, which when I was there and currently is under attack, as well as the really gorgeous Texas sunsets that I loved experiencing at night. So you can see kind of the full gradient of pastels all the way down to the horizon. And this is kind of a dream piece. I mean, I designed it when there were a number of construction workers pulling up rebar from the ground, and they made these like really big, gorgeous tangles. And so I thought it would be so cool if you could turn that into a sculpture, something intentional that you were inviting people to look at. And I was lucky enough to be selected to create a public work of art based on that idea. And for this piece, I worked with a wonderful metal worker in Colorado who helped me shape the rebar. So I've got two more works that I wanted to talk about. This is a piece that's called Cloud Transmission, and it was a temporary work, larger scale work of art. So for this, I was actually looking at Japanese ukiyo-e prints and the shapes of clouds and water, and thinking about the way that we try to hold on to things that keep eluding our grasp. So like the way that we have digital images that we upload to the cloud, how we try to freeze moments with pictures. And this was the result of that, the exploration of that idea. Um, and then the final piece that I wanted to talk about is one of my very favorite pieces. And this was a piece that I was able to do at CICA Museum. And this is actually thousands of tiny adhesive bumps for furniture that I put on the wall to resemble something moving or dispersing. So dew or birds or a swarm of some sort. And this was during a time when I was moving around a lot. So I wasn't employed as a professor, and I had a year off, and I'm about to have a year off again. So I was really thinking about the idea of being nomadic. And for this work, I actually named it after um, one of my favorite lines in a poem by Mary Oliver that's called For the Birds. And she talks about, in the poem, she talks about the reason that birds are free is because they have no belongings weighing them down. So I was thinking, what would happen if you were to get rid of all of your belongings as an artist? How would that free you or maybe trap you at the same time? That is all.